Little girl told Vampire King, "I'll be your queen someday." 20 years later, she returned in chains. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In a small, quiet village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a little girl named Eliza. She was the daughter of a poor family, with little more than the warmth of a humble home and a heart full of dreams. Despite her circumstances, Eliza had an unwavering belief in something greater, something beyond the life she was born into. One fateful evening, while wandering near the edge of the forest, she crossed paths with a mysterious figure, a tall man with eyes as deep and dark as the night sky. His presence was commanding, yet there was something almost otherworldly about him. He was no ordinary man. He was a vampire king. His name was Lucian, a ruler of ancient lineage, known across the lands for his power and cold demeanor. But in that moment, Eliza did not know who he was. She only saw a figure in need, a being who looked as though he had been through centuries of turmoil. He seemed tired, weary, and something in her heart stirred with empathy. Without hesitation, Eliza approached him, her small hand reaching out to offer him a simple gift, a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked along the way. She looked up at him with innocent eyes and said, "I'll be your queen someday." The words, spoken without understanding of their weight, echoed in the still air. Lucian stared at her, his gaze hardening for just a moment, then softening as if something inside him had been awakened. He knelt down to her level, his cold voice carrying a strange warmth. "You have a kind heart, little one," he said, "but such promises are not made lightly." Eliza smiled, unbothered by his cryptic words. In her youthful innocence, she simply believed that one day, somehow, she would stand beside him, ruling by his side. Lucian left that night, disappearing into the shadows, but the words of that young girl lingered with him. For the Vampire King, immortality had worn thin, and though he had seen countless lives come and go, there was something about the simple promise from a child that stirred something long buried within him. He could not forget Eliza. Years passed. Eliza grew older, her life full of hardship, yet she held on to that moment with Lucian. She never forgot the words she had spoken, even as the weight of reality bore down on her. She believed, deep in her soul, that one day, fate would bring them together again. Little did she know, the years ahead would not unfold as she had imagined. A dark force began to stir in the kingdom, one that would test Eliza in ways she never expected. And as time passed, her dreams would take a turn, leading her back to the Vampire King's world, but not in the way she had hoped. Eliza's life would soon take an unimaginable twist, and the promise she had made all those years ago would come back to her in a way that would change everything. I had no idea how much time had passed since that fateful day in the forest, but I was no longer the innocent girl who had made a promise to a vampire king. Life had a way of changing you, whether you were ready or not. The small village I once called home had long since been replaced by the bustling city, and my simple dreams had been overshadowed by the harsh realities of adulthood. The years were unkind, each one passing with a reminder of the promise I had made, yet never thought I would fulfill. I had grown into a young woman, my life full of struggle, but my heart still carried the hope that someday, somehow, I would see Lucian again. The memory of that day in the forest never left me, even though my circumstances had become far more complicated. I had suffered, I had loved, and I had lost. But the thought of him, the Vampire King, lingered in my mind. The weight of his gaze, the coldness that surrounded him, and those words he had spoken to me all those years ago. "You have a kind heart, little one." Then one day, everything changed. I was just walking down the crowded streets of the city, minding my own business, when I felt a strange sensation. It was as if the world around me had slowed down, and the noise of the city faded into the background. My eyes locked onto a figure standing at the corner of the street, his presence so commanding that the crowd seemed to part around him. My heart skipped a beat. There he was, Lucian, the Vampire King, older but still as striking as I remembered, his eyes gleaming with the same intensity they had that night in the forest. I froze for a moment, my heart racing, unsure if I was seeing things or if he truly stood before me. My mind raced back to that promise I had made all those years ago. I'll be your queen someday. Could this really be happening? Was I really about to face him again? Lucien stepped forward, his eyes never leaving mine, and the crowd seemed to sense his power, moving aside as if they, too, recognized the weight of his presence. He didn't speak at first. His gaze was piercing, studying me with a depth I couldn't fully comprehend. You look just like her, he said, his voice low and steady, but there was something in it. Something soft, something unexpected. He was referring to the woman I had never met, the one who had somehow been a part of our connection. Like who? I asked, my voice trembling, but I couldn't look away. Like my lost love, he replied, a shadow crossing his face. His words hit me like a tidal wave, and I felt a strange chill. Had he been waiting for me all these years, or was I just a fleeting memory to him? You said you would be my queen, Lucien continued, stepping closer, his eyes still locked onto mine. But I'm afraid that day will never come, Eliza. His use of my name sent a shiver down my spine. It had been so long, but he remembered me. How could he remember me after all this time? What do you mean? I whispered, my voice barely audible in the silence that seemed to surround us. Lucien took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. The curse that binds me to this world, he said, his voice darkening, and the curse that keeps me from truly living. It's a fate I cannot escape, no matter how much time passes. I had heard stories of curses, of powerful beings trapped in a cycle of endless suffering, but I never imagined that I, too, would become part of such a tale. What does this have to do with me? I asked, feeling my heart race in my chest. Everything, he replied, his eyes narrowing. You were meant to be more than just a memory. You were meant to be my salvation. His words left me stunned. Salvation? How could I, just a simple woman, be his salvation? But before I could ask him anything more, the world seemed to tilt around me. A sharp pain ran through my chest, and I staggered back. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Lucien reaching out for me, his face filled with something I had never seen before, fear. When I woke, I was no longer in the city. The surroundings were unfamiliar, and the air was thick with an eerie stillness. I was in a castle, a grand place with towering stone walls and ornate tapestries that seemed to tell the stories of long-forgotten times. My hands were bound, and I felt a weight in my heart. What had happened? Why was I here? Lucien stood before me, his expression unreadable. You are here because of the curse, he said, his voice now cold, distant. But you also have a part to play in breaking it. I couldn't understand. This was not the reunion I had imagined. My promise to be his queen was not the fairy tale I had dreamed of. But somehow, I knew that this was only the beginning of a journey I was destined to take. One that would change everything I thought I knew about love, power, and fate. I woke up in an unfamiliar room, the sound of distant thunder echoing through the thick stone walls of what appeared to be a grand castle. My mind was foggy, and I couldn't quite grasp what had happened. The last thing I remembered was being in the city, feeling Lucien's intense gaze upon me, and then everything went dark. I slowly sat up, my hands still bound by cold iron chains that were attached to the bedpost. Panic surged through me as I realized where I was. The castle was enormous, its high ceilings adorned with ancient tapestries, and the air smelled faintly of old wood and magic. I tried to move, but found the chains preventing me from going far. I tugged at them in frustration, but the metal was too strong. As I struggled, the door creaked open, and Lucien stepped inside. His presence filled the room, his tall figure silhouetted against the light coming from the corridor. You're awake, he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I looked up at him, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Anger, fear, but also something else, something that made my heart beat faster, despite everything. What is this place? Why am I here? I demanded, trying to stand, but my legs were weak from the restraints. Lucien took a step forward, his eyes filled with something unreadable. This is my home, and you are here because you are the key to breaking the curse that has bound me for centuries. His words hit me like a bolt of lightning. The curse? I remembered him mentioning something about it before, but I had no idea it was this serious. What curse? What do you mean? I asked, my voice shaking with uncertainty. Lucien sighed deeply and walked toward the window, looking out over the vast, shadowy landscape below. I've lived for centuries, Eliza. Long enough to see kingdoms rise and fall, to experience every possible emotion, love, loss, regret, and still, I remain here, trapped in this immortal existence. The curse that binds me is ancient, and I can't break it alone. His words were filled with a deep sorrow that I hadn't expected. I had always seen him as a powerful, unyielding king, but now, I saw a man who was as much a prisoner of his own fate as I was of my circumstances. So, you brought me here to help you break a curse? I asked, trying to make sense of it all. Lucien nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the distant horizon. You are the descendant of the witch who cursed me. Your bloodline holds the key to my freedom. But there's a price. A price? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What kind of price? I asked, the unease growing inside me. Lucien turned to face me, his amber eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. The price is your life, he said quietly, his words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. You will have to give up your freedom, your life, to save mine. His confession took me by surprise, and I struggled to process what he was saying. You want me to sacrifice my life? I asked, disbelief rising in my chest. Lucien's expression softened slightly. Not in the way you think. I would never ask you to give up everything for me. But the curse is bound to you, Eliza. It was never meant to be broken without a cost. If you help me, you will forever be connected to me. Your fate will be tied to mine. I could hardly believe what he was saying. Sacrificing my life wasn't just a metaphor. It was a real possibility. And yet, deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this connection, something beyond the curse. I had made a promise all those years ago, and now, it seemed like that promise was coming back to haunt me. But was I willing to pay the price? Was I ready to give up everything for a man who had been lost to time? The weight of my decision felt heavy, and as I sat there in the cold, dark room, I knew that everything had changed. My life, my future, and my very identity were no longer mine to control. I was part of something far bigger than myself, and the consequences of my choices would ripple through eternity. Lucien's voice broke through my thoughts. You don't have to decide now, he said, his tone unexpectedly gentle. But know this, Eliza, whether you choose to help me or not, you will never leave this place the same. I looked up at him, my heart racing in my chest. This was just the beginning, and whether I liked it or not, my destiny was now entwined with his. I sat there, my hands still bound by the cold chains, trying to make sense of what Lucien had told me. A curse. My bloodline. Sacrifice. His words echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain. The weight of what he was asking of me was almost too much to bear. How could I, a mere woman, be the key to breaking a curse that had plagued him for centuries? And how could I possibly agree to a life bound to someone like him? A powerful, ancient vampire, whose past was as dark as the night itself. But there was something in the way he looked at me, something soft in his eyes that made me question everything I thought I knew. He wasn't just a king or a monster. He was a man who had been trapped in his own immortality, cursed to live a life of endless loneliness. And perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't asking for my sacrifice because he wanted to control me. Maybe it was because he was desperate to break free, to feel something real again. You don't have to decide today, Lucien's voice broke through my thoughts. His tone was calm, almost reassuring. He stood by the window, gazing out at the dark, mist-covered forest that surrounded the castle. But understand this, Eliza. The curse will not lift unless you help me. And in the end, you will be the one who decides whether or not you want to live with the consequences. His words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I could feel the tension between us, the pull of fate that seemed to weave our lives together. I had no idea what that would mean, what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. My life was no longer mine to control. After a long silence, Lucien turned back toward me, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that took my breath away. Do you remember the promise you made? He asked, his voice quieter now. Do you remember saying you would be my queen? I closed my eyes, trying to push away the flood of memories that came rushing back. The little girl I had been, the girl who had spoken those words in the forest, was gone. and in her place was a woman who was afraid of what she was about to face. Yes, I remember, I whispered. The words felt foreign on my tongue now, as if I were speaking someone else's truth. But I don't know if I can live up to that promise. Lucien took a step closer, his expression softening. You don't have to live up to anything. You're not a little girl anymore, Eliza. You are a woman, and your choices will be yours to make. His words were comforting, but they didn't ease the turmoil inside me. How could I make a decision that would affect not just my life, but the fate of someone who had been alive for centuries? How could I promise to help him break a curse when I wasn't sure if I could trust him, or even myself? What happens if I refuse? I asked, my voice shaking slightly despite my best efforts to sound confident. Lucien's gaze darkened, but not in anger. There was something deeper, something sadder. Then we remain as we are. I remain a prisoner of this curse, bound to live in the shadows for eternity. And you, Eliza, will return to your life, but it will never be the same. The curse is tied to you as much as it is to me. It will follow you, in one form or another, until the end of your days. His words sent a chill down my spine. Was there no escape from this? Was my destiny truly sealed by a promise I had made so long ago? I looked down at the chains that held me, then back at Lucien. The man who had once seemed so distant, so untouchable, now seemed as trapped as I was. The truth was, I didn't want to live in a world where I couldn't change my fate. But was I willing to gamble everything on the chance that helping him could set me free? For what felt like an eternity, we stood in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling through the ancient stone walls of the castle. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, the decision before me like a dark abyss I had no idea how to cross. Finally, I spoke. My voice was steady, though my heart raced. I'll help you, I said, the words feeling like a weight lifted from my chest. But I need to understand everything. I need to know what I'm really getting myself into. Lucien's eyes softened, and for the first time since I had arrived in the castle, I saw a flicker of something like hope in his gaze. Of course, he replied, his voice barely a whisper. I will tell you everything. But know this, Eliza. Once you make this choice, there is no going back. I nodded, feeling the gravity of my decision settling in. This was it. There was no turning back now. I had chosen my path, and whether I was ready or not, my fate and Lucien's were now intertwined in a way I couldn't yet understand. I stood in the shadow of Lucien, the weight of my decision pressing down on me like the cold air that filled the room. He had promised to explain everything, to tell me what I was getting myself into. I had agreed to help him, but the reality of what I was about to face still felt like a distant dream. It wasn't just the curse that had drawn me in, or the chance to be a part of his world. It was something deeper, something I couldn't quite put into words. Lucien led me through the castle's labyrinthine halls, his movements graceful and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. The stone walls seemed to close in around us, the flickering torches casting long shadows on the floor. There was an eerie silence in the air, broken only by the sound of our footsteps. I followed him, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. What was it that he had to tell me? We arrived at a large wooden door, ancient and adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to tell stories of a long-forgotten time. Lucien turned to me, his expression unreadable. This is where it all began, he said, his voice low and almost reverent. The curse that binds me, that has kept me alive for centuries, lies within these walls. He pushed open the door, and we stepped into a dimly lit chamber. The room was filled with old books and scrolls, their pages yellowed with age. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, and atop it rested a glowing crystal. The light from the crystal seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, casting strange patterns across the room. Lucien walked toward the pedestal, his hand hovering just above the crystal. This is the source of the curse, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. It was placed here by a powerful witch, someone who knew the consequences of what they were doing. And it was my destiny to carry the burden of it. I moved closer, feeling an overwhelming sense of power emanating from the crystal. It was like it was calling to me, drawing me in with its magnetic pull. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of centuries of suffering trapped within this room. How did this curse come to be? I asked, my voice trembling slightly as I tried to understand. Lucien turned to me, his eyes darkening. It was a long time ago, Eliza. Before I became the Vampire King, before I knew what it meant to rule. I was a man, a king who thought he could have everything. I was selfish, blinded by my own desires. I loved a woman. She was a witch, powerful and beautiful. But I took her for granted. I thought I could control her, that I could make her love me without giving anything in return. His voice faltered for a moment, and I could see the pain in his eyes, the regret that had lingered with him for centuries. In my arrogance, I betrayed her. I broke her heart, and she cursed me. She cursed me to live forever, to feel the weight of time pressing on me until the end of my days. She bound me to this crystal, to this curse, and told me I would never find peace until I learned the true meaning of love. I could feel the sorrow in his words, the burden of the curse that had shaped his existence. I had always seen him as powerful, untouchable, but now I understood that even someone like him could be trapped by their past, by their mistakes. And that's why you need me, I said softly, the pieces falling into place. Lucien nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. Yes, you are the descendant of the witch who cursed me. Your bloodline holds the key to breaking the curse. But there's more to it than that. You see, Eliza, the curse is not just about time or immortality. It's about understanding love, true, unconditional love. And that's something I've never truly known. I stood there in silence, absorbing his words. The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't just about breaking a curse. It was about changing the course of history, about undoing centuries of regret and pain. But could I really help him? Could I truly be the one to break the chains that had bound him for so long? Lucien took a step closer, his eyes filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I don't expect you to understand everything right away. But know this, Eliza, you are not just a means to an end for me. You are the person who can free me from this curse. And in return, I will give you a life beyond anything you can imagine. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I had made a promise all those years ago, a promise I never thought would lead me here. And now, standing before him, I realized that my journey was only beginning. The curse, the love, the power, it was all tied together in ways I couldn't yet understand. But I knew one thing for sure. My fate, and Lucien's, were now inextricably linked. And there was no turning back. I stood before the pedestal, the crystal glowing brighter than ever before. Lucien's words echoed in my mind. This was the key to breaking his curse. But as I looked at the crystal, I couldn't help but wonder if I was really ready to be the one who would change his fate. Could I truly live up to the promise I had made so long ago, as a child? The weight of his gaze, the burden of his past, and the future that seemed so uncertain pressed on me. But somehow, I knew that there was no turning back. Lucien approached me slowly, his steps soft on the stone floor, as though the air itself feared his presence. He stood next to me, his hand brushing mine, and for a moment, the world felt still. His usual cold demeanor had softened, and I could feel something shift in the air between us, a bond that was not just of duty, but of something deeper, something I wasn't yet sure how to name. He wasn't just a king, a ruler of ancient powers. He was a man with a heart that had been locked away for centuries. I know this isn't easy for you, Lucien said quietly, his voice almost a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 years. But the curse, it binds me in ways you can't yet understand. And it's not just my life that's at stake. The curse affects everything, everyone. It's a force that extends far beyond me. If we don't break it, it will continue to consume both our worlds. His words struck me with a chill, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Not with him standing by my side. His presence now more than just the embodiment of ancient power. He had become something to me, someone who needed my help, someone who had trusted me with his truth. I'll help you, I said, my voice steady as I looked him in the eyes. But I need to know more. You said the curse affects both of our worlds. What do you mean? Lucien paused, his gaze shifting as if recalling something buried deep within. When the witch cursed me, she bound not just my soul, but the very fabric of our existence. Our worlds, yours and mine, are intertwined in ways you can't imagine. My curse affects more than just me. It has caused a rift between our realms. The balance between the living and the supernatural has been disrupted, And if it continues, there will be consequences that will affect everyone. I could feel the gravity of his words sinking in. I wasn't just helping him. I was helping both our worlds, helping to restore a balance that had been lost for centuries. What happens if we don't succeed? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. If we fail, Lucian said softly, the rift will grow wider. The supernatural will consume the human world, and the veil between our realms will collapse. It's not just about me anymore. It's about everything that exists, life, death, and the worlds that bridge them. His words were a heavy burden, one that seemed impossible to carry. But looking at him, I knew I had already crossed the point of no return. I couldn't walk away from this. Not now. I understand, I replied. What do we need to do? Lucian turned toward the pedestal, his eyes narrowing as he studied the glowing crystal. The crystal is the heart of the curse. It must be destroyed, but the destruction of it comes at a cost. The one who destroys it will be bound to the curse. Their life will be forever connected to it, and they will bear its burden until the end of time. I felt a sharp sting in my chest at his words. The price was clear now, and if I destroy it, I will be bound to the curse forever. Lucian nodded slowly. Yes, but there is a way to reverse it. You would not carry the burden alone. I will share it with you. The curse would bind us both, but together, we could find a way to break it completely. But that means we must face the curse head-on, together. I felt the weight of his words, but strangely, I wasn't afraid. A sense of resolve filled me, and I stepped closer to the pedestal, my hand reaching out toward the crystal. The air around it crackled with energy, as though it was alive, aware of my touch. My fingers brushed the surface, and a jolt of power coursed through me, the bond between us intensifying. I'm ready, I said, my voice firm. Let's do it. Lucian's eyes softened, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw a flicker of something real in his gaze, a spark of hope, of trust. He stepped closer, placing his hand on mine. Then let's end this curse, Eliza, he said, his voice strong and full of determination. With that, we raised our hands together, and the crystal pulsed brightly, a blinding light filling the room. I could feel the curse, the magic, the ancient power flowing through me, and I knew that this moment would change everything. There was no going back now. We were in this together, bound by fate and by the power of the curse itself. Together, we would face whatever came next. I stood there, my heart racing as the blinding light of the crystal enveloped us both. The power surged through me, a tidal wave of energy that threatened to consume everything in its path. I could feel Lucian's presence beside me, his hand still on mine, grounding me amidst the chaos. The curse, the very thing that had bound us both for so long, was finally being unleashed. But what would happen to us now? What was the cost of breaking such an ancient and powerful bond? The light from the crystal intensified, and I felt my body go cold, the energy seeping into my very soul. It was as if time itself had stopped, the world outside of us disappearing into the vastness of eternity. The crystal pulsed with the rhythm of my heartbeat, and I could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on me, both a burden and a promise. This was it, the moment where our destinies would be sealed. Lucian's voice broke through the chaos, steady and strong. Hold on, Eliza, he said, his grip tightening on my hand. We're almost there. Just stay with me. I nodded, my breath coming in short gasps, as the energy continued to swell around us. The air was thick with magic, crackling with power. It felt as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. What's happening? I gasped, struggling to keep my focus. Are we doing it? Lucian's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something in them that was not just cold and distant, but vulnerable, human. Yes, he said, his voice filled with determination. We are. But you need to remember, this isn't just about breaking the curse. It's about us, Eliza. About you and me. Together. His words made my heart ache. How had we come to this point? How had this ancient vampire, bound by centuries of regret and power, become someone I could trust, someone I could care for? And how had I become the key to unlocking his freedom? The answer was clear now. It was not just fate that had brought us together. It was something more, something beyond the curse. The crystal pulsed again, and I felt the magic surge through me once more intense than before. This time, it was different. It was as if the energy was feeding into me, filling me with something both terrifying and exhilarating. I could feel the weight of the curse shifting, the bond between Lucien and I strengthening, but also breaking apart. The crystal's light began to fade, and the air around us grew still. "It's done," Lucien whispered, his voice filled with awe. I looked at him, my heart still pounding in my chest. The energy around us had dissipated, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The curse, the source of all the pain and suffering, the thing that had kept Lucien locked in his immortal prison, was gone. But so much had changed. Lucien pulled me into his arms, his embrace tight and protective. "We did it, Eliza," he said, his voice hoarse. "You freed me. But we're not the same anymore. This curse, it's gone, but it's left something behind." I felt his words resonate deep inside me, a strange, powerful force that was both familiar and foreign. The magic had changed us, bonded us in ways I couldn't fully understand. But there was no going back. Our lives, our destinies, were now linked forever. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What did this mean for us? What did this mean for me, for Lucien, and for the world we had just saved? Lucien stepped back, looking into my eyes with a newfound intensity. "Now, Eliza, we face the future together. We don't know what's coming, but we'll face it side by side. We've broken the curse, but we've also created a new path. A path where we can choose our own fate. No more curses. No more chains." His words brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was longing for. We had done the impossible. Together, we had shattered the chains that had bound him for centuries, and in doing so, we had freed ourselves. But what came next? What was our future now that the curse was gone? Lucien's hand cupped my cheek, and he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a soft, tender kiss. For a moment, everything else faded away. There was no curse, no past, no chains. There was only the two of us, standing together in the aftermath of everything we had just faced. When we finally pulled away, I saw the same realization reflected in his eyes. We had broken the curse, but we had also found something else, something that neither of us had expected. A bond that was stronger than magic, stronger than the curse itself. "We're free," I said, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Lucien smiled back, his eyes softening. "Yes, we are. But now, we make our own way. Together." And for the first time in centuries, Lucien was truly free. And so was I. I stood beside Lucien, the weight of our decision finally sinking in. The curse had been broken, the chains that had held him for centuries shattered, and yet, something still felt incomplete. We had freed each other, yes, but the world was still a vast, uncertain place. The consequences of what we had done, of breaking an ancient bond, were yet to unfold, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the true challenge was just beginning. Lucien had told me that now, without the curse, we could shape our own future. The freedom we had earned came at a price, and it wasn't just the curse that was gone. Something within us had changed. Our bond had deepened, but the magic that had once defined us was no longer there, leaving behind something raw and untamed. The power we had shared had left us both vulnerable, but it had also given us something that felt even more precious. A chance at something real, something beyond the chains of fate. The silence between us stretched as we walked through the castle halls, now eerily quiet without the hum of magic that had once filled the air. The vastness of the castle no longer seemed so imposing, but rather, it felt like a space we could now call our own. Yet, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that lingered in the back of my mind. What were we supposed to do now? We had faced the curse, but the future was still uncertain. Lucien seemed to sense my unease, his hand brushing mine as we walked. His presence was comforting, yet the uncertainty we both shared hung between us. "What do we do now, Eliza?" he asked, his voice soft but tinged with something I hadn't heard before, a hint of vulnerability. "We've broken the curse, but the world is still out there. And so are the consequences." I looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. The world had always seemed like a distant, unreachable place when I was in the village, but now, standing by his side, I realized just how small the world had been. "I don't know," I admitted, the uncertainty in my voice mirroring his. "But I do know one thing. We've come this far together, and I think that's what matters the most." Lucien's eyes softened, and for a moment, It was as though the centuries between us had disappeared. He was no longer the cold, distant king, but the man who had shared his heart with me, his pain, his past. And I realized then that we were no longer bound by a curse, but by a choice to be together, to face whatever came next, not as victims of fate, but as partners. As we continued through the castle, the weight of our past began to feel less oppressive. The echoes of the curse faded into the background, replaced by a quiet sense of possibility. We were free now, but that freedom came with its own set of challenges. The world was not kind to those who lived outside its rules, especially for someone like Lucien. His past, his title, they were both burdens he had carried for centuries. But now, with the curse gone, he was free to forge a new path. And for the first time in a long while, I saw something like hope in his eyes. I never thought I would feel this way, Lucien said, breaking the silence once again. I've spent so long trapped in my own past, but now I see there's more. More to life, more to us. I never believed I could find peace, Eliza. But with you, I think I might. His words stirred something deep within me. I had never imagined that my life would lead me here, standing in a castle, bound to a vampire king who had been trapped by a curse for centuries. But here I was, no longer the naive girl who had once dreamed of becoming his queen, but a woman who had fought beside him, shared in his suffering, and now stood with him as an equal. The love and trust we had built together over the course of this journey was far more than I had ever imagined. But what do we do now? I asked again, this time with more certainty. What is our next step? Lucien stopped walking and turned to face me. The weight of his past seemed to lift from his shoulders, and I saw a glimmer of the man he could be without the chains of immortality. We live, Eliza. We live, and we find our place in the world. Together. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of destiny pushing down on me. We were not victims of fate anymore. We were free to choose our path. The future was unknown, but for the first time, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. As Lucien and I stood together in that moment, I realized that no matter what the world threw at us, we had already faced the impossible. And now, we would face the future, not as a vampire and his curse, but as two souls bound together by choice, ready to carve our own destiny. I stood beside Lucien, the air around us heavy with the weight of unspoken thoughts. The world outside was still, almost unnaturally so, as if waiting for something to change. We had broken the curse. We had freed ourselves from the chains that bound him, and now, for the first time in centuries, Lucien was not the prisoner of fate. He was free. But as I stood there, the question that had been lingering in the back of my mind for so long finally surfaced. What now? We had crossed the threshold of freedom, but the path ahead was unclear. There was no longer a curse, no longer a dark force hanging over us. But that didn't mean the world had suddenly become a place of peace. The supernatural realm that Lucien had once ruled was vast, filled with power struggles and ancient politics. And there was still the human world, the world I belonged to, that would never fully accept what Lucien was, or what he had once been. Lucien's gaze met mine, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a man who had ruled kingdoms and faced countless challenges. But now, faced with the unknown, he was as vulnerable as I felt. Eliza, he said, his voice low and serious, we've done what many thought was impossible. We've broken the curse. But we can't forget the world we left behind. The balance that's been disturbed will not simply repair itself. I nodded, my thoughts swirling. We had done the impossible, but what did that mean for us? Could we truly live freely in a world that had once been dominated by the darkness Lucien represented? Could I reconcile the love I felt for him with the fear and prejudice the world still held for creatures like him? We can't undo the past, Lucien continued, his eyes fixed on something far beyond me. But we can choose what we do with the future. I don't want to be the man I was before, but I need your help, Eliza. I need to know what comes next, not just for me, but for both of us. I stepped closer, my heart pounding as the weight of his words settled deep within me. I had been thrust into a world I didn't understand, and yet, in all the chaos and uncertainty, I had found something, someone, worth fighting for. I'll be with you, Lucien, I said, my voice steady, no matter what we face. Together, we'll find a way forward. His expression softened, and for a brief moment, the weight of centuries of pain and isolation seemed to lift from his shoulders. Together, he repeated, as though tasting the word for the first time. As we stood there, the silence between us felt less oppressive. It wasn't the silence of fear or uncertainty, but the kind that comes with understanding, with a shared purpose. We didn't know what would come next, but we knew we wouldn't face it alone. The world was vast, and it was full of challenges, but we had something stronger than magic or power: each other. "We'll need to rebuild," Lucien said after a moment, his tone turning pragmatic. "There are factions in the supernatural world that won't simply accept my disappearance. I was their king. My absence will create chaos." "And the humans?" I asked. "What about them?" Lucien's gaze darkened. "The human world is not so easily swayed. They fear us, and they have every reason to. My past, the things I've done, it's not something they will forget quickly. We'll change that," I said, more confidently than I felt. "We'll show them that things can be different." Lucien looked at me, a mix of admiration and disbelief in his eyes. "You truly believe that?" "I do," I said firmly. "The world can change, but it starts with us." His expression softened, a rare smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I never thought I'd find someone who would challenge me in this way. I never thought I'd find someone like you," I replied, a smile tugging at my own lips. And in that moment, despite all the uncertainty that lay ahead, I knew we were ready. Ready to face whatever challenges the world threw at us. Ready to build something new, something better. The world may have feared the curse that had once bound Lucien, but it had no idea what we were capable of now. Together, we would shape our own destiny. Together, we would create a future that was ours to decide. As we turned to leave the castle behind, the first light of dawn broke through the dark sky. It was a new day, and for the first time, I could see a future where the world was no longer divided by fear and magic, but united by love and the choices we made. I stood beside Lucien, the morning sun filtering through the castle's tall windows. The once imposing walls now seemed like a place of refuge, a space where we could breathe freely, unshackled by the weight of the past. The curse was gone, but the world we had to face was still unknown. We had taken the first step toward our new life, but the journey ahead would be filled with challenges. Lucien had ruled over the supernatural world for centuries, and now, after breaking free from the chains that had bound him, he was faced with the task of rebuilding it. It was no small feat, but we would do it together, just as we had done everything else. Lucien turned to me, his eyes filled with determination, but also something softer, something that had been missing for so long. "We have a long road ahead," he said, his voice steady. "The supernatural world is fractured. My absence will cause chaos, and there will be those who will try to fill the void I left behind." I nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. The supernatural world had been built on power and dominance, and now that Lucien was no longer at the helm, those who had once answered to him would look for a new leader. "But we'll fix it," I said, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. "Together, we'll unite the factions. We'll show them that they don't need a king to rule. They need something better." Lucien's gaze softened as he reached for my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "You have more faith in this world than I do," he said, a trace of admiration in his voice. "But I believe in you, Eliza. And I believe in us." We had always faced the impossible together, and now, we would take on the future. The challenges would be great, but for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face them head-on. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still those in the supernatural world who viewed humans as inferior, who believed that the balance of power could only be maintained through fear and control. But Lucien and I were determined to change that. We weren't going to let the past define us. We would build something new, something that didn't rely on the old ways. We would show both humans and vampires that peace, not power, could be the foundation of a better future. As Lucien and I made our way through the castle, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what we had accomplished. We had shattered an ancient curse, defeated the darkness that had bound us, and now, we had the freedom to create our own destiny. But freedom came with responsibility. We couldn't undo the centuries of conflict between humans and vampires, but we could be the ones to bridge that divide. We would fight for unity, for understanding, for something better than what had come before. The sun was high in the sky as we walked into the courtyard. The air was warm, filled with the promise of a new day. Lucian stopped and turned to face me, his expression serious yet hopeful. "Are you ready for this, Eliza?" he asked. I looked at him, seeing not the king who had once ruled over me, but the man who had stood by my side through every trial. "I am," I said, my voice unwavering. "Together, we'll make a difference." Lucian smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened his features. "Then let's begin." And with that, we stepped into the future, not as rulers, but as equals. The world was waiting for us to lead it into a new era. It wouldn't be easy, but we had each other, and together, we were unstoppable. I stood next to Lucian, the castle now more than just a place of refuge, but a symbol of our shared journey. The weight of the past had been lifted, and for the first time, we stood not as master and servant, but as equals. We had broken the curse together, freed him from the chains that had bound him for centuries. Yet, the world we faced was not the world we had once known. It was a world full of challenges, where the darkness of the past still lingered in the hearts of those who ruled the supernatural world, and in the minds of those who feared it. The road ahead was uncertain, but Lucian and I had made a pact. We would rebuild the fractured supernatural realm, not through fear, but through unity. The first steps were small, but they were ours to take. We had faced the impossible, and now, together, we would face the future. But not everyone welcomed the change we were bringing. The factions within the supernatural world were restless, their power structures disrupted. By Lucian's departure, vampires who had once pledged loyalty to him now found themselves without a king, and some of them were not pleased with the idea of a world where power was no longer the only currency. "We have to start with the council," Lucian said one evening as we sat in the study, poring over ancient texts and maps of the supernatural territories. "There are still some who believe in the old ways, in control, in domination. We need to show them that we can coexist with humans, that power doesn't have to come at the cost of peace." I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "And if they don't agree?" Lucian's eyes darkened, the shadow of his past leadership still haunting him. "Then we will have to show them that change is inevitable. It won't be easy, and there will be those who resist, but we are not the same people we were before. We have the power to create something different." As we continued our work, the days turned into weeks, and the tension between the factions began to grow. We made progress, but it was slow. Lucian met with leaders from various vampire clans, seeking their support for our cause. Some were open to the idea of peace, of unity, but others were skeptical. They had seen the world ruled by power for so long that the concept of a peaceful coexistence seemed foreign to them. "We cannot force them to change," Lucian told me one evening, his voice weary. "But we cannot let them stand in our way either. We have a vision, Eliza, and we will fight for it." I could see the strain on him, the weight of his past, and the responsibility of shaping the future pressing down on him. He had been a king, a ruler, and now, he was something else, a leader of change. I admired him for his strength, but I also knew the burden he carried was immense. "We will make them see, Lucian," I said, my voice firm with conviction. "You don't have to carry this alone. We're in this together." His eyes softened as he looked at me, and for a moment, the walls he had built around himself seemed to fall away. "You give me strength, Eliza," he said quietly. "More than you know." But just as things seemed to be shifting, a new challenge arose. One night, as we were preparing for a meeting with a powerful faction of vampires, a messenger arrived at the castle with urgent news. A rogue group of vampires had begun stirring unrest in the farthest reaches of the supernatural world, challenging the idea of peace and unity. They were gathering followers, calling for a return to the old ways, and they would stop at nothing to disrupt the progress we had made. Lucian's expression hardened as he read the message. "This is what we feared," he said, his voice cold with resolve. "There will always be those who prefer chaos to order, those who thrive in darkness. We cannot allow them to undo everything we've worked for." I could see the fire in his eyes, the king returning in him once more. But this time, he wasn't fighting for dominance. He was fighting for something much bigger. "What do we do now?" I asked, my heart racing. Lucian turned to face me, determination etched in every line of his face. "We confront them. We show them that the old ways are gone. We won't let them drag us back into the darkness. And just like that, the path ahead became clear. We had worked for peace, for unity, but we couldn't ignore the threat that still loomed. The rogue faction had to be dealt with, and if it meant a battle to protect everything we had fought for, then we would fight. Together, we would face the storm, side by side. The world was changing, but there would always be those who resisted. It was up to us to ensure that the light we had found together would not be snuffed out by the darkness of the past. We would fight, not just for ourselves, but for the future we believed in. I stood next to Lucien, the weight of the situation heavy on my shoulders as the news of the rogue faction spread. Our efforts to unite the supernatural world had been met with resistance, and now it seemed that resistance had grown into a full-blown threat. The rogue vampires who had once lived in the shadows, content to live outside of Lucien's rule, were now openly challenging the changes we had worked so hard to build. They were stirring unrest, spreading fear, and rallying those who still believed in the old ways, the ways of power, fear, and domination. Lucien had spent centuries as their king, and now he was a target of their defiance. It was a bitter irony that after breaking free from the curse that had held him for so long, the world he had once ruled was now seeking to pull him back into the darkness. But Lucien wasn't the same man he had been. He had broken the chains of his past, and now he was ready to fight for the future. Together, we had created something new, something that didn't rely on the old power structures. But that didn't mean we could avoid the fight ahead. We had to stand up for everything we believed in. We can't let them destroy what we've built, Lucien said, his voice calm but filled with an intensity that told me he was ready for the battle ahead. We've come too far, Eliza. I won't let anyone take that away from us. I looked at him, the man who had been a king, a prisoner, and now an ally in this fight for a better future. The weight of his words hit me like a wave, but it wasn't fear I felt. It was determination. The rogue faction had already made their move, and now it was our turn. We're not going to let them win, I said, my voice steady, despite the storm of thoughts and emotions swirling in my mind. We fought for peace, for change. We're going to protect it. Lucien nodded, his expression hardening. We will, but we need to gather allies. There are other factions out there, vampires who understand that power through fear is no longer the answer. They're just waiting for the right moment to stand up. And so, we set out to rally those who still believed in the vision we had shared. We couldn't do this alone. The supernatural world was vast, and though Lucien had once ruled over it with an iron fist, now, he had to convince others that the old ways were dead. It wouldn't be easy. Vampires, like humans, could be stubborn. But we had one thing the rogue faction didn't have: hope. As we traveled to meet with various leaders, I began to see the vast network of the supernatural world. There were territories ruled by ancient vampire families, powerful werewolves, and creatures who lived hidden from the human world, their existence a secret to most. Some were afraid of change, while others were eager to join our cause. But all of them knew the consequences if the rogue faction succeeded. They couldn't let the darkness return. We have to show them what we stand for, I said, looking out at the horizon as we traveled from one meeting to the next. We're not just fighting for our own survival. We're fighting for a future where everyone, humans and supernatural beings alike, can live in peace. Lucien's gaze softened as he turned to me, his hand brushing mine. And we will fight for it. You're right, Eliza. We don't just fight for us. We fight for the world we believe in. As the days passed, the support for our cause grew, and so did the strength of our resolve. But the rogue faction was relentless, their influence spreading through the shadows, gathering more followers with each passing day. They weren't going to back down without a fight, and neither were we. The time for words had passed. It was time for action. The battle we had feared was now upon us. But Lucien and I stood united, ready to face whatever came next. The stakes were high, and the world we had fought for was on the line. But we had something stronger than fear. We had hope, and together, we would fight for it. The battlefield was quiet for a moment, the tension hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. Lucien and I stood at the forefront, our allies gathered behind us, a coalition of supernatural beings who had finally come together under a common cause. The rogue faction was not far off, their presence like a dark shadow stretching across the horizon. They were a threat to everything we had fought for, everything we had rebuilt, and today, we would confront them head-on. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the culmination of everything that had led us here. The curse was gone, the chains that had bound Lucien were shattered, and now, we had to defend the future we had chosen together. Lucien's presence beside me was steadying, his strength radiating through the space between us. We were no longer just fighting for survival. This battle was for the world we believed in. We had come too far to let fear and darkness rule again. This is it, Lucien said, his voice steady but filled with determination. We fight for the future. For peace. I nodded, my heart racing in my chest. We fight together. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw in Lucien the same fire that had led him to become a king, a fire now tempered by years of loss and the hope of something better. He was no longer the ruler he once was, but a leader of a new world, a world where power was not defined by domination, but by unity and choice. The rogue faction moved forward, their figures casting long shadows across the battlefield. They were a mix of powerful vampires, creatures who had rejected the changes we had brought, and who now sought to return to the old ways of fear and control. Their leader, a man once loyal to Lucien, stepped forward, his eyes cold with hatred. You think you can change everything, Lucien? He spat. You think the supernatural world will bow to your foolish dream of peace? Lucien stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. No one is asking for anyone to bow. We're asking for change. For a future where we all stand together, not apart. The rogue leader sneered. You've become weak, Lucien. Peace is an illusion. Power is all that matters. With a wave of his hand, the rogue faction surged forward, a tide of darkness against the light we had fought to create. The clash was immediate, the sound of battle ringing through the air. Vampires, werewolves, and creatures of all kinds collided, their powers unleashing with a fury that shook the ground beneath us. Lucien and I fought side by side, our movements in sync as we took down our enemies with precision and strength. But even as the battle raged on, I could feel something else. The weight of the decision we had made to fight, to create a new world. We were not just fighting for our lives. We were fighting for something bigger, something that would outlast us. As we continued to fight, I saw the rogue leader, his eyes filled with madness, charging toward us. I knew that this was the moment. The battle had come down to this. The future we had chosen, and the future they wanted to keep, would be decided here, today. Lucien met his gaze. The two of them locking eyes as they prepared for their final confrontation. You were once my ally, Lucien said, his voice tinged with regret. But you've chosen a path of destruction. This ends now. The rogue leader lunged, but Lucien was faster, his movements fluid and powerful. With one swift strike, he disarmed his former ally, knocking him to the ground. It's over, Lucien said, his voice low but resolute. The rogue leader lay on the ground, defeated, his once proud form crumpled before us. The battle was won, but I knew that the real work was just beginning. The supernatural world was forever changed, and now, it was up to us to rebuild it. The tension in the air began to dissipate, and as the last of the rogue faction was defeated, I turned to Lucien. His face was covered in blood, his eyes fierce, but there was something else there too, a sense of relief. We had done it. We had faced the darkness and won. Together. The battlefield was now quiet, the remnants of the fight scattered across the land. The world we had fought for was still standing, and with it, the future we had chosen. Lucien turned to me, his eyes softening. It's over, Eliza, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. We did it. Together. I smiled, feeling the weight of everything we had accomplished. We had not just defeated the darkness, we had created a new world. A world where hope and unity could triumph over fear and division. And as we stood together, looking out over the battlefield, I knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would not be easy, but it would be ours to walk. Together. Vampire stories have long captivated audiences with their dark allure, powerful characters, and eternal struggles. In this thrilling narrative, the boundaries between light and darkness blur, as a powerful vampire king and a human woman unite to break a centuries-old curse. Together, they face a world filled with intrigue, betrayal, and the promise of something new. As the supernatural world teeters on the brink of war, These two characters must confront their pasts and fight for the future they believe in. Their journey is one of transformation, showing that even in the world of vampire stories, redemption and hope can shine through. The challenges they face are not only physical but emotional, as they fight for peace in a world where power has long been the only language understood. With their bond tested and a new world waiting to be built, the stakes are higher than ever. This tale captures the essence of vampire stories, blending action, romance, and fantasy into an unforgettable experience. As the story unfolds, we see how love, unity, and courage can change the course of destiny, proving that even in the darkest of times, the light of hope can prevail. Dive into this compelling world of vampires, where every choice matters and the future hangs in the balance. These vampire stories offer more than just thrilling battles. They explore the complex relationships that define our existence, where every challenge faced brings our heroes closer to their ultimate goal. In the end, these vampire stories reveal that true power comes not from fear, but from the strength of unity and love.